Yes, please do that. And then
Okay.
if you do have a question and the conversation is lively, go to the chat and let me know you have a question, or I can ask it for you, whichever you prefer.
Okay, thank you.
You betcha. Thank you. Welcome. All right, let's see if Diane can get in this time. Here she is. Diane, are you there? Where is she?
I am. Thanks, Janine. Sorry.
Okay.
Update that shows right about now, too.
Figures. Well, great. I'm glad you could get through, and thank you, everyone. Just note that I will keep everyone muted unless you're speaking, and that this just improves the sound quality all the way around through the meeting. Oh, and also use the chat function if you have questions, if you want me to ask a question, or if you want to get my attention so I can put you in the queue to ask a question. Otherwise, Lisa, if you want to go from there.
Yeah, I think that's all the housekeeping we need to do. I suppose if anyone needs a reminder and they need to text Janine in an emergency, like they can't get back on or something, her number's 303-921-2208. Otherwise, welcome everyone to the Lowry Landfill CAG meeting. And we're gonna start the meeting off straight away with Linda Kiefer, the project manager from EPA.
So welcome everyone. I'm Linda Kiefer. I'm the project manager for EPA for the Lowry Landfill Superfund site. I'd like to welcome the new members, the Villarios, and Mayor Mike Kaufman. So as new members, you're welcome to call or email Lisa or myself if you have any questions or need some site information. We do post documents up on EPA's website for the Lowry Landfill Superfund site. So I'll have Lisa send you a welcome email and with instructions on how to find those documents. I do have a couple updates for today. So it's been a while since we had a facilitator, and within EPA, we've been struggling to get one on board through our contracting. We did get some promising information this morning that there were several people that submitted their resumes, so we'll be reviewing them. So we did make progress on that, and we're hoping to have someone in place by January. And then I have an update on the TAG grant funding that the TAG has applied for. There have been delays for several reasons, and EPA has, we originally asked that a completed application be submitted as soon as possible in June due to the end of EPA's fiscal year approaching the end. We have deadlines that have to be met. We didn't receive a complete package in time to meet the end of the fiscal year, which was September 30th. And then in the meantime, our system's undergoing some maintenance. So it won't be back up and running until December. So we understand that this presents challenges to the TAG group. However, we are unable to make any awards or reimbursements until the system maintenance is complete. On another topic, so last Friday, I sent out to the group a letter responding to Bonnie's email on October 28th regarding EPA's response to the surface water white paper. In summary, we stand by our response, and we won't be instituting a surface water monitoring plan at this time for that area north of Yale, unless we have information in the future that indicates that we should take that into consideration. Additionally, the need for a surface water monitoring plan would need to be documented in a future 5-year review. That letter will soon be posted to the EPA's website. However, I think most of everyone on this call received a copy of it by email. And then on another letter went out yesterday from our regional administrator, Greg Sopkin. Bonnie had some questions about several items, and so I just wanted to briefly cover some of those in this meeting. And I think most of you probably received that letter too. So regarding documents that are produced and available for public comment, please understand that all comments are seriously considered, whether or not documents are final when they're reviewed. A public review process is not statutorily required for any site-related document, except in the case of records of decisions, sometimes for explanations of significant differences, which are decision documents, and then when the site is listed on the national priorities list, and then when it's delisted from the national priorities list. So that's when, those are the only times under CERCLA we're statutorily required to have an official public comment period. The site team determines if a particular work product or report represents a significant change or update to an existing site information. And if so, a public review process may be considered. Under the Lowry Landfill Community Involvement Plan that was finalized in July and did go out for public review, there is an option for feedback on any document. That's where you can submit in writing or email or by calling Lisa a comment. That's also not statutorily required, but in that case, EPA will post final documents on its website. And sometimes the CAG chairs will receive a paper copy due to the size of the document at the same time that EPA and the state receives them from the WSDs. And then based on Bonnie's letter, EPA has decided to improve the timeliness of our notifications of newly available site documents. To do that, EPA will send a mass email to the CAG email list with the documents and links attached. So since our last meeting in October, several documents have been completed, and most of them are available on EPA's webpage. Some have been sent to the CAG president and the TA in paper format, and others are in the process of being added to our electronic system and will soon be available. Currently available on the webpage is an updated waste management plan. Another one is the North End monitoring plan. It's the second update to that plan. The first version of it was in 2007, and the second one was in 2008. And the paper copy that went out to Bonnie and I believe Dietrich was the containment system evaluation plan for the north boundary barrier wall. It's significant in size. This issuance of this plan was the result of conversations between EPA and CDPHE to resolve our dispute that we had over the containment system evaluation, and that was resolved officially earlier this month. Also on our website is a letter from EPA to 4 residents of Gun Club Estates who requested to have their wells sampled under the Lowry Landfill Remedial Oversight Program. That request has been referred to our site assessment groups for EPA and CDPHE, so a copy of that letter is on our website if you wanted to review it. And then lastly, currently being added to the EPA's website is the molybdenum report. We had several CAG meetings where we discussed elevated molybdenum up by the north boundary barrier wall. The WSDs have written a tech memo on that and the potential sources. So that'll be available shortly. And Lisa will send out an email with the link so you can review that and if you wanted to comment on that. So documents coming up in the future that will be available for public review, which is a 30-day period to review the document and then submit written comments to EPA, are the conceptual site model update. And we had hoped that that would be available for the public in August because of manpower resources being limited. It's currently not finished, but it will be available shortly. So that will come out for public review. In addition, the WSDs are working on the containment system evaluation. That draft will come out toward the end of this year for EPA and the state to review. And so we're expecting it to be out for public review the first quarter of 2021. Two other documents are being worked on right now. Two, it has not been determined if it's going to go out for public review or just feedback. And they are the effectiveness evaluations for the extraction features on the landfill site. We did have a request from the CAG to, this is a new topic, to have a CAG meeting on December 10th. CDPHE and EPA are available, and so are the WSDs. So at that meeting, Diane McMillan, who is a speaker later today at this meeting, will update everyone on the development of the conceptual site model. So that'll help prepare for when it does become available for public review. I know it's always easier for me to have a presentation on a document before I review it. So that will be for the December meeting. And then my last update is that the September CAG meeting I mentioned that EPA was invited to speak at the September 9th City of Aurora Planning and Economic Development Committee in regards to an ordinance that's being proposed. Dr. Berry did give a presentation on the 2002 risk assessment for the North area. And then EPA followed up with a letter to that committee. That letter is available on EPA's website if you want to review it. And then yesterday morning, by looking at Aurora's website, I saw that there is a study session scheduled for next Monday, November 23rd, discussing the Lowry landfill with presentations by the technical advisor, Dietrich McGinnis, and the LLSF TAG co-president, Bonnie Rader. So while EPA was notified by Aurora that EPA could listen in tentatively to a 11/16 study session, like we were not notified of the November 23rd session, nor invited to speak at that. So EPA will be following up in writing after we listen to the session on the 23rd.
Linda,
So that's all I have for my updates.
Linda, I just wanted to make one correction. I think you misspoke and you said the 2002 risk assessment. You meant 2020.
Yes, exactly. It's 2020, the most recent one that came out in September.
I have a question.
Oh, sorry. And then after Margie, maybe I can go. It's Karen.
Oh, I'm sorry. My question, Linda, is we've been waiting quite a long time for the resolution of the issue that CDPHE and EPA had. And we were always told that while it was in the process of being resolved, we couldn't really understand what it was about. So now that it's been resolved, I'd appreciate knowing what the issue was and how it got resolved.
So Colleen, are you on this call?
Yes, I'm on the call.
Yeah, because I don't want to speak for the state because the state was the one that invoked the dispute. So if you can answer, that'd be great.
Yes, the dispute was over the plan to evaluate the containment at the North Boundary Barrier Wall. There was disagreement between the state and EPA on how the plan should address that area, what was looked at in the plan, basically how to apply EPA's 2008 guidance document to that North Boundary Barrier Wall containment. So we worked through the issues in the plan and ultimately came to a resolution on the approach to evaluate the North Boundary Barrier Wall. And once that plan was finalized, that became the endpoint.
Colleen, could you possibly lean in more? The sound for your, I don't know if everyone's experiencing that, but it was very difficult to hear you.
Yeah, I think the mic is going down on my earphones. Is that better?
That's better.
Okay. So I will repeat or try to repeat what I said. So the dispute was essentially over the plan on how to evaluate containment at the North Boundary Barrier Wall. The state and EPA had a difference in opinion on how to approach
You're really
that.
breaking up again.
Okay, let me see if I can change earphones real quick. All right, can you hear me?
Much
Yes.
better.
Okay, I'm going to do it without earphones right now and we'll go from there. Okay, so the dispute was over the differences of opinion between EPA and the state on how to best evaluate containment at the North Boundary Barrier Wall, and specifically how to apply EPA's 2008 containment system evaluation guidance to the North Boundary Barrier Wall area. So through a series of meetings and revisions of the plan, ultimately EPA and CDPHE came to an agreement on the best way to evaluate that area. And we basically came to an agreement in the final version of that plan, which is now available for review. So that documents really the areas that we agreed on.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to clarify and follow up on Linda's notification that we are having an item on a special study session on Monday. It might be confusing if you see my name next to that item. However, in our form of government, I report to the city manager and he reports to council. And so when a council member has requested and received approval from the mayor to have an item on the agenda, then I, as a staff member who's familiar with this particular item, will put that on the agenda for the Mayor Pro Tem, Nicole Johnson. You all know her. So I just wanted to make sure that you all know that the council member for Ward 2 and Mayor Pro Tem, Nicole Johnson, is sponsoring the item and will be doing the introduction of that item at study session. If you do have questions about anything you hear and you want to follow up, I'm glad to facilitate that for those of you listening in. So just wanted to make sure you knew how that got on the agenda. So thank you.
And then, so this is Linda. Can you explain what a study session is for people who, this is new to me what it is. And I did some research, but I think it would be, I know each city does it a little differently. So maybe if you can explain for the group how it works.
And since I have Mayor Kaufman on the line, he can correct me if I get this wrong. But the study session is part of a council process. So if there's something going in as an ordinance or the city council has to review an item before it goes to the floor in regular meeting, they'll do that in study session. we often have items for information only at those meetings. And every so often, every couple of months or so, they'll have a special study session on a night when there's not a council meeting, so that they can look at items that they really need to dig into, or that are controversial, or that are sponsored by a council member. So this particular Monday, there's no regular meeting. This is just a couple of items that the council needs to look at, and they need to look at in depth, and they need the time to do that. So this was one where Mayor Pro Tem Johnson asked for 45 minutes, and that is a very tough amount of time to get in a very packed agenda when they are making process decisions to get regulations. So in this particular case, they asked for it on special study session. And so this is just, it's also not, it's not normal to have public invited to be heard at study session. There is a public invited to be heard at the regular meetings, either on not an agenda item or on an agenda item. So in this particular case, outside speakers specifically need to be invited to speak. And so that's what we had permission to do, was to have Bonnie and Dietrich as representing McGinnis and Associates to make a presentation. So, and I will tell you that, Linda, if you looked at the backup, and I guess I'm not positive, I don't know if it's posted yet, the letter that you provided, you had technical difficulties at the committee meeting, and we asked that you send in a letter to make sure that that was on the record. That is included in the backup. So if you get a chance to look at that packet, we included the meeting minutes, we included Dr. Berry's presentation. So there is some information in there because they need to know the history of the item. They ask for the history of the item. And so your presentation was part of that. So if that's not been posted, you know what, I will get a link to that, whether it's posted tonight or if it's posted tomorrow, and get a link out to you all so you can see that information.
And then can you let people on the call know how they can watch the study session and when it is and how that all works?
Right now it's scheduled for 6:30 tomorrow, and I'm going to send out a link to the live page and just ask that, because there are things that happen out of my control. So there could be a change at the last minute. I want to make sure when that agenda is posted, it can be amended. So I'll just say you might want to check in, a couple of hours before the meeting just to make sure that the agenda wasn't revised. But I'll send a link out to the webpage for the council meetings. There's a link also so that you can stream it live from your device.
Karen,
So
could
is
you
it on
put,
Friday or Monday?
The information comes out usually the Friday before.
Oh, but
We're not real quick on getting those things posted because they're usually big packets. And it goes through the clerk's office. So I'm going to make sure that the packet is up there before I send out the link. So that might be tomorrow morning. And then you'll have all the backup.
Is the study session the 23rd, Monday?
It's the 23rd, and the packet is posted no later than the Friday before.
Okay.
And there's information about the council meetings on the link that I'll send out to you. You guys have my email address. Ask me questions. We definitely want to make sure that you have the information to listen in. And if I get any word that the agenda has been amended and there's a different time or something else, I will send out an email to everybody. I'll just assume everybody would want to know that. And so it's easier for me if I just kind of reply all on that one. And it happens. I'll just say it happens sometimes. So, and then I'll also say that there's a very long executive closed door session where they talk about certain items that are not for public review right before that meeting. And so there's a lot of times when they don't start on time. So if I'm going to be on, I'm going to be waiting to, just like you all are, to be able to see when that item comes up. If you're not seeing what you're supposed to be seeing, or you don't think if you think the meeting started and you can't get in, email me and I will do my best to troubleshoot and figure out how to make sure you can listen in. The other thing that happens, although it's not probably the best for this group, is they are recorded and they are posted on our website, and you can always watch the recordings. So, and then this particular item is for information only. There will be no decision made on this information.
Okay.
Karen, could
They'll
you
have a
post,
discussion. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Karen, could you post the website, the URL for for this information to the chat function on this meeting, please?
I will. I'll just say that it's possible, and I'm going to go in right after I turn off my camera and mute, that the packet may not be up there yet. Sometimes it's late getting posted because they have, you know, they're trying to prepare it for council. So if for some reason you go in there tonight and it's not in there, just check tomorrow morning. Okay?
Right, right.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And I will do that. Absolutely. And then use the chat function to ask me questions about this, and if you need materials or if you need further clarification. So did I get to your questions? I'm on. Let me know. Chat with me.
Okay. I think if that's it for the first series of updates, let's switch over to Bonnie. And I believe she wants to introduce some folks. You're muted, Bonnie. Bonnie, you're still muted. Janine, can you unmute Bonnie? Oh.
Got it. My system won't let me do it. I apologize. Okay, thank you very much for this few minutes. I asked for some time to update the CAG on, or the group on CAG's latest activities. So I'll just get started by telling you, and you've just talked about it, but Bonnie Rader and Dietrich McGinnis have accepted invitations from Aurora Mayor Pro Tem Nicole Johnson and Aurora Mayor Michael Kaufman to speak at the City of Aurora City Council study session on November 23rd, 2020. After the September 9, 2020 risk assessment presentation by David Barry on behalf of EPA, and the October 1st, 2020 letter from Linda Kiefer to Council Member Francois Bergen regarding potential development restrictions around the Lowry Landfill Superfund site, Council wanted to learn more about the Lowry Superfund site from various perspectives. The study session on November 23rd, 2020 will provide more information to help further Council's well-rounded understanding of the site. As providing education is an important function of the TAG-CAD, we were pleased to accept the invitations to speak. So I'm not sure if somebody is under the impression that EPA was supposed to be notified to attend to. Linda, I'm not sure what your question was, but we weren't invited to the presentation that David Barry made. So I don't know if we had done something incorrect by accepting this invitation, but we're not using CAG monies to do this. The second item I have to talk with all of you about is that it's been 4 years since the CAG was formed and we approved bylaws and officers. CAG board has renewed their commitment to serve on the CAG board. CAG board has reconfirmed their commitment to the CAG bylaws, and the board has reconfirmed their support for Chair Bonnie Rader and Co-Chair Tom Kraus. And most importantly, we're very pleased to welcome 2 new CAG board members, Mary and Rudy Villarreal. And if they would like to just say hi and introduce themselves and where they live, we would really appreciate that.
Are you ready for us to speak, Bonnie?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm Mary, and this is my husband, Rudy Villarreal, and we have lived in the Thunderbird Estates community for 31 years and have enjoyed this way of life and have watched many, many, many of the changes that have occurred since we've moved in here. Over a period of years, we had consistently experienced different well water issues. We did put in 4,800 gallon cisterns to help our well survive. We happened to be down in the Denver aquifer, and this year our water went dry again. And for the first time, I really got involved. I thought, you know, we've got to be able to find some resolution to this, and began calling into all of the water departments and speaking with some very nice people. But the overall, Bonnie, are you able to hear me? I'm sorry.
I can now. Yes, I can hear you fine.
Okay, thank you. So, but the overall message that really surprised me was the fact one department official actually said, yes, we've known that Thunderbird Estates has had water forever. I mean, water issues forever. And I said, well, how do we know if everything is being depleted and, you know, what the water levels are? Oh, that's too expensive for us to go in and monitor those water levels. And we know it's expensive to drill, and we know it's about $80,000 for us to get down into the Arapahoe. And I began to feel a little shunned that we have a community of 100 people, and that's not taking into account Gun Club Estates or any of the other communities that have well water. And I'm seeing all of the development and all of the fracking going on, and it just felt a little bit like David and Goliath, that we are a community that one big giant step, you just go over us. We've never had snow plowing. We have poor internet. We can't even get Comcast out here. And so I hate to say it, my redheaded side took over. And I thought there has got to be some fairness in what is occurring, and that you can't leave communities without water or having the burden of trying to get water to themselves when we've continued over the years to try to improve our own personal system. So throughout that process, I finally got up the gumption to send out an email to my community of Thunderbird Estates and said, you know, is anybody else experiencing this water issue? And sure enough, there have been 4 or 5 people that have had their pumps burn out because of no water being sucked through it. Our daughter lives down the street. She was one of those this year. She's 700 feet down. I'm 605. There have been a number of wells that have had to be re-drilled over the past couple of years. And through that process, then Bonnie and I connect, and I began to realize that there's equally as big a concern with the Lowry landfill site being a Superfund site. And so I have spent probably 40 or 50 hours reading about the Superfund site, about the development, you know, like Prosper and all of those, and where are they getting their water, and all the different issues to educate myself. And then my husband, of course, is joined with me in that process. So it became clear that as a resident and as a citizen, I think that we need to get involved. I know that there are other people that I've been speaking with in our area that are looking at getting involved as well. And so I'm here learning, and I'm fascinated by the process, but we are concerned, and we really hope that 100 families are not just stepped over. So anyway, thank you to the CAG for having brought us in on board. We hope that in the future that we can contribute a lot. We are self-employed. We sell to nursing homes and hospitals, and have for the last 17 years. And because of COVID, our doors have been shut, basically, because you can't go into the nursing homes yet. So that's probably why I've had so much opportunity to go ahead and start doing the massive amounts of research and learning that it's taken just to get to where we are today. So thank you for listening.
Well, welcome, Mary and Rudy. We're glad to have you on board. And so that was a good breakdown of your individual circumstances, and there's a lot of them out here that are concerned. So thank you, and we welcome you to the board. Okay, so I will go on. The CAG has received 3 letters of response from EPA. November 13, 2020, response to McGinnis Surface Water White Paper. November 17, 2020, final stormwater Q&As from Sarah Peters. November 18, 2020, response to questions why WSD's distributed final documents. The last item on today's agenda is topics for December 10th, 2020 CAG meeting. CAG board requests that we discuss these 3 responses from EPA at the December meeting. We got a lot to take on today, and we have to finish answering the questions that we couldn't finish at the last meeting. So we would like to discuss these 3 letters. And leading into that, I need to just let you all know that when the question of forming a CAG was being discussed in 2017, Tom Krause and I asked to meet with Steve Wharton. And Steve agreed, and at that meeting, he introduced us to Rebecca Thomas. We discussed why the community wanted to form a CAG. We explained to Rebecca our frustrations with the fact that once the 2005 consent decree was signed, the community was allowed to comment and EPA appeared to listen, but the concerns and suggestions from the community were never recognized or acted upon. The community was hopeful that a CAG would provide a forum for the community to express their concerns and give more teeth to community concerns, needs, and issues. Steve and Rebecca agreed at that meeting that the community goals were compatible to EPA's surplus Superfund requirements, and that the CAG should be a good vehicle with which to move forward to improve community involvement at the Lowry Landfill Superfund site. Under Rebecca Thomas's guidance, the communication exchange improved, and the community was encouraged by the progress that the CAG was making in their efforts. But as always happens at EPA, we lost our EPA problem solver when Rebecca retired. After Rebecca was gone, when you read the EPA response to the community, it has gone back to statements such as EPA listened to you, EPA appreciates feedback and input, but the letters end with, here is why EPA does not agree with you. The letters between the community and EPA are a constant back and forth with no agreement or discussion of possible solutions. We're going like dogs in a circle chasing a tail. There's never any discussion of finding solutions and preventing the possible negative impacts to the community. The community is looking for solutions to these perceived threats. What are the threats? Well, folks, to us, 138 million gallons of chemical waste remain at the site. A risk assessment, which was calculated using water located miles away from the mass of chemicals at the site, cannot possibly guarantee us that the mass will never breach and impact the community. 2 aquifers, the Denver and the Dawson aquifers, are already impacted by chemicals, with no apparent emergency response plan to protect the Arapahoe and Fox Hill aquifers from a breach of the mass, which would render the water from Pueblo to Wyoming border useless. Increased concern that years of injection of more than 100 million gallons of potable water from the aquifers by the WSDs into the site, combined with years of overmining of all the aquifers by all users, has caused the aquifers to drop significantly, which exposes private wells to drawing in polluted water or having no water at all. The WSDs claim that the Lowry Landfill Superfund site is not a pump and treat site when they are clearly pumping and treating in the on-site water treatment plant. WSDs refuse to cooperate with the community in our request. The WSDs follow the clearly defined 2008 capture zone analysis. Instead, the WSDs have replaced the guidance with the CSE, an unproven technology which the community believes will sacrifice the protection of the people and the environment. Finally, the claims that the ARARs are not applicable at Lowry Landfill Superfund site because the ARARs were frozen at the time of the record of decision. How can EPA complete the requirements in the 2017 5-year review, do minor mods or explanation of significant differences if ARARs are frozen? These are the concerns and perceived threats that our community sees to our community and the underlying aquifers. When discussing the recent responses, the CAG board came to consensus that the CAG is very dedicated to finding a solution rather than this unending chasing of tails around and around in circles, but never coming or talking about solutions. As stated in the July 19, 2017 CAG meeting summary, the purpose and roles of the CAG forming is a basis for a well-functioning and cohesive CAG can increase the community influence on site-related decisions. Bullet 4 says it is a way to give more teeth to the community recommendations about the site. Bullet 5, it'll promote collaborative rather than adversarial communication relationships. Bullet 6, it means we'll be involved with finding solutions, a way to help get the site cleaned up. The site compliance data tells us that actions taken to date by the WSDs are not working. If we continue on in this manner, we're only delaying the inevitable and the problems will only get worse. The CAG is of the opinion that WSDs need to pay attention to the liability with respect to the uncontained source material. Denver and Waste Management, the CAG is reaching out to you. We would like to know if you would be willing to use this CAG as a vehicle to improve communication and problem-solving efforts by basing a work group on the Lowry Landfill Superfund Site Monitoring Committee that was formed by former Governor Richard Lamb in the 1980s. Using the monitoring committee guidelines as a model for our working group, the monitoring committee included community members, industry representatives, cities and counties, water departments, CDPHE, and EPA as the lead agency. We suggest that this type of forum could provide an opportunity for all of us to work together on solutions for addressing issues at the Lowry Landfill Superfund site. The CAG looks to work with and assist the City of Denver and Waste Management to do their due diligence to remove the threat. The CAG plans to follow up and meet with Denver City Council and Mayor Hancock to ask for their support. We know we won't get an answer tonight, but we would like you to think it over and get back with us perhaps by the next meeting to discuss this solution. That's all the update I have from the CAG tonight.
Okay. Is there anyone else wants to follow that with any questions or statements? Okay. Let's jump into what for new people might seem like the middle of something very specific, and it is. It's a list of questions that we began at the last CAG meeting, and we are continuing at this meeting. And I believe we are starting with the document 12- Roman numeral 3. And Diane McMillan with Tetra Tech will be following, addressing those questions as we go, with other members jumping in and assisting as, interjecting and whatever is needed to respond to the questions. You want to go ahead, Diane?
I will. Just to get started, can everybody hear me okay? Is the audio all right?
Sounds good.
Okay,
Good.
sometimes it goes in and out, so wave at me if it starts to get kind of odd. Can you see the screen with the meeting agenda?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Quickly, I'm Diane McMillan. I'm a consultant with Tetra Tech, who is contracted through EPA to provide technical support. I'm a professional engineer, and I've been working on this site for about 8 years, and I've been with Tetra Tech for about 19. So they've asked me to kind of go through some of the technical questions. You should have all received this meeting agenda. And at the bottom of it is a list of questions that we received from Bonnie and Dietrich on October 6th. And then we started going over these materials at the last CAG meeting. And, it was such a robust meeting that we didn't get all the way through them. So I'm going to be picking up, as Lisa said, at 12.3. But I encourage you to, read through these. The meetings are recorded, so newer people can go back and listen to the responses to these recordings already. So I will scroll down. Oh, and one point of clarification. I know that Bonnie had asked under This one, 12.2, we were talking about the definition between the Dawson Formation and the Denver Formation. You were correct, Bunny. I was incorrect when I stated that that transition was around the north boundary barrier wall. And I believe Sarah corrected me that it is actually north to Yale. So just to give you that clarification, it is, I was wrong, it's north or Yale. So starting on 12-2, I'm sorry, 12-3, there's a long list of questions about the capture zone analysis, the CSE of the north boundary barrier wall. And there's a lot of questions about the drawdown of the extraction wells. And I would ask for your patience with that. We submitted, I guess the WSD submitted a plan for the containment system evaluation work plan. And so that is out there for you to review, and that work is ongoing. So EPA is going to put off responses to those particular questions until that report is done and the analysis is done. But these questions will be retained and answered at a later date when we have a substantive response for you with actual data associated with it. But the CSC does include a numerical model as asked in some of the questions. So scrolling down to 12.4, this question was about the extraction wells. And the question is, when the extraction wells are coupled with monitoring wells, how are you interpreting the contaminant concentrations in the monitoring well to account for the effects that the extraction well has on those concentrations? Just a little bit of background, especially for newer people to the site. The question is asking about extraction wells where groundwater is removed from the subsurface and sent to the treatment facility. And then there's monitoring wells that are used just to, as it says, monitor concentrations in the groundwater. And the question is a good one because you typically don't use extraction wells to monitor some of the concentrations, especially in volatile organic compounds, because when you're pulling that water through the formation into the well, it can aerate it, and that can cause some of the volatile chemicals to be released, and so your concentration in the groundwater is not as high as it would typically be. So it could, change the concentration a little bit. A couple of things to know: these extraction well samples are not being used for site decisions. So the samples that are collected from the extraction wells are not compliance wells. They're not used for compliance. They're not used for decision making at the site. Things that they can be used for that are still helpful is just some general site knowledge of what's going on in that area. And then maybe the WSDs need that information for what the influent into their treatment system might be. So there is some value to those samples. The second thing to think about is 1,4-dioxane is not a volatile compound. So, those kind of problems that you might have with TCE or PCE are not going to be found in 1,4-dioxane samples. So once 1,4-dioxane is dissolved into groundwater, it doesn't like to go anywhere. It likes to stay there. So it doesn't, those mechanisms don't impact the samples of 1,4-dioxane the same way it would other compounds. And I believe the data that they've seen, the concentrations detected in those extraction wells are similar to what you're seeing in nearby wells. And that's a good question because that is something that's always a concern. Question 12.5. So the question is the barriers to vertical flow within the Section 31 or the DADS landfill cell are placed to protect the environment. It is acknowledged that you have stated that you cannot drill through those barriers. And then there are further questions about whether a protective casing would help. Just to give some background on that as well, what they're referencing is the closed landfill cell, the Denver Arapahoe disposal site. And I'll show it on this figure here, which is a little hard to see. I'll give you kind of an overview. Here's the Lowry landfill, and then here's the Denver Arapahoe disposal site up here. And if you ever drive by the site, it's that really large mound of, with vegetation on it. and I'll zoom in. And the question was talking about gathering data in the geology or the hydrogeology underneath that cell. And we've stated a few times that it's not a practical effort to do. And on top of that, the state of Colorado has, will not allow you to drill through that. So the way that these cells are constructed, they have a barrier at the bottom of it, which prevents any liquid or fluid in the waste from entering the ground underneath the landfill surface. And that barrier needs to be intact to be able to do its job. So any drilling through it is not going to happen because of those reasons. So the question was, are there ways that we could do it with a protective casing, which means, in the borehole, you would put kind of a barrier around it. And it's typically done in drilling to prevent contamination from up here to go down here. But in this case, no, that would not be allowed. So the second question is, what non-invasive methods are available to better define the hydrogeology, and are we using them? And if not, why not? And I think on this figure, you can see that we already have data underneath this landfill cell. So in the 1990s, before the waste was placed on this property, there are all of these dots that I'm kind of pointing out. These are soil borings that were advanced in the area before the waste was placed. So from these borings, we have information on the geology in this area. And then we have wells that are all around the outside of the waste that we can use to evaluate how the groundwater flows in that area. So I guess, the first point is it's unnecessary because we already have that data.
Hey, Diane,
Mm-hmm.
we do have a question in the chat. And the question is,
Okay.
are you accepting the 2008 EPA guidelines, quote, a systemic approach for evaluation of capture zones at pump and treat systems, unquote, or not? Are you accepting them or not?
So I assume that goes back to this question here on 12.3.
Yes.
Again, I think we're going to talk about that in a lot more detail at a meeting later on. That's not under my purview. I would kick that over to Linda or Colleen to talk about, why they came to the conclusions in the work plan that they did. I don't know, Colleen or Linda, do you want to go into that, or do you want to make that a topic at a later meeting?
I think we should make it a topic at a later, unless Colleen wants to say something about it.
Briefly, we did try to incorporate that 2008 guidance.
Closer to the mic, please.
Not sure. Okay. So can you hear me now? Still? I gotta
Not really.
A little bit better though.
Janine, is anybody? Nope, still.
You're very faint.
No, I can.
Another time.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, if Sarah's on, maybe Sarah Teschner might have something to say about it. I know she's got her kids. She's sole parenting tonight, so I'm not sure if she's available. Well, there she is.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I guess just simply, I think that this more became a misunderstanding than ever a real disagreement. And so once sort of we did that crosswalk about the steps in the guidance and what work is being done for the containment system evaluation. And once we were able to sort of communicate that on that clearly, I think that both CDPHE and EPA came to an understanding that not only are all of the applicable steps of the guidance being followed, but because it is a complicated site with barrier features, extraction features, and a lot more information about the hydrogeology, the groundwater conditions, and elevations, the levels of groundwater across the site, north of the site. And yes, I did. And the geology from all of the core log from drilling the wells. The numerical model tool that was developed for the containment system evaluation is clearly far more robust than what that guidance outlines as any sort of expectation for your normal groundwater plume. So I think that it was just a matter of making sure the technical experts came together and clearly communicated on it. And then once that occurred, and some tweaks were made too throughout the process, some wording, some expectations, and deliverables, it was very clear that there wasn't an actual dispute left.
Go ahead, Tom.
Hi, this is Tom Kraus. That question that we're not answering today, 12-3, was basically on the 2008 capture and treat guidelines, or capture zone guidelines. Anyway, it doesn't look like to me that you're defining any target capture zone. And if you're not doing that, how can you be following the guidelines, and how can you know what you need to contain or not, and whether or not your containment's working?
I am happy to dive into this now. I actually don't think the explanation would be that long. However, it is starting to get into the weeds. So do we want to get into this briefly and then keep going, or do we want to just kind of follow the thread tonight?
I'd follow the thread and see how it goes. If it gets too in-depth, then we'll just pick it up next month. But yeah, I'd go with it.
Okay, so that's one of the things that once we sort of fleshed out what the containment system evaluation is actually doing, it became sort of clear the difference between that step in the capture zone analysis and the approach in the CSE. So that step in the capture zone analysis, it's more complex than just saying identify the area you're targeting for capture. That's sort of designed for a situation where you have, say, a leaky tank at a gas station, and it emplaced a bunch of gasoline in the subsurface, and then there's a plume around that, and you're looking at a pump and treat system to be involved. And so you're saying we need to capture this affected groundwater in this area and make sure all of our extraction systems reach those areas of groundwater. Now, as we've mentioned previously, the goal for the remedial approach for Lowry is to contain waste on site and prevent problematic migration. And there are extraction features that are part of that process, and those do affect the groundwater flow. However, that waste on site is designated as waste in place. It's not targeted for removal with the extraction systems, and that's not possible. That's just beyond that technology. So instead, you're looking at, because groundwater flows north-northwest, you're looking at primarily, but not only, that boundary. The evaluation does look at all aspects, but the most significant one is that boundary to the north in the direction of groundwater flow, and saying what particles of groundwater might not be getting either stopped by a barrier feature or extracted by an extraction well or a drain. And once those are identified, you can say, okay, well, what is the water quality in that location? Is it contaminated? And thus might be contributing to contaminant transport and migration north of the site. So I guess for step one, the conceptual of what is targeted for capture, it's more what is targeted for migration prevention. And step one is, let's look at all of the groundwater moving north from the site. where that might not be contained, step 2 is, okay, is the water in that area contaminated?
I tend to think that this is like a leaky tank with 138 million gallons of contaminant in it, and it's leaking out of the MW38 area. It's leaking out of the north boundary barrier wall area. It's leaking out of the east side. It has leaked out of the west side before. And I think that there ought to be a capture zone for all those areas where it's coming out of the Lowry Landfill Superfund site. And that way, the 2008 guidelines very much do apply.
Fully agree, absolutely. So you're sort of targeting some specific areas that migration has been observed in some cases, and the extraction systems and, 1 second, sweetheart. The extraction systems are designed and evaluated in exactly that way. And where they have not been capturing, some tweaks have been made, wells have been added through time. So this is sort of this point in time, we're looking at all of the systems together and doing an in-depth review to achieve exactly what you just said. For
Well,
those,
if that's true, then why aren't you putting in a target capture zone and saying whether or not you're actually achieving capture within that zone?
I think the goal of the site is bigger than that. It's achieving capture where that's the goal and maintaining containment where that's the goal. The site,
Okay, well, I think that the problem I'm trying to address is if you don't have a target capture zone, you can't say that what you're doing is correct. And it's part of making sure that things don't get out from the site. And you're just leaving an open area like MW38. There's nothing that says what's happening to the 1,4-dioxane and whatever else is going out with it, where it's going and how far it's gone. And even in the north boundary barrier wall area, you haven't really defined the area that you're really trying to keep it within. And the same is true to the east. So I guess I need some help from understanding that.
yeah, so I think that you're identifying some ongoing questions that you have, and I think that as we're able to, as the containment system evaluation is completed, and that evaluation of what do all the data say is going on in the NW38 channel, for instance, what wells are we looking at there? What do the results present for us to evaluate? It's going to make this part of the conversation, these subsequent questions, a lot easier to talk about and explore. So I don't think that can all be sort of answered to your satisfaction right now, but I think that, you know, as things progress, we'll be able to evaluate those questions more specifically.
Can we evaluate them at the next meeting? On the 10th?
Well, we do have some information on a lot of these areas that you're talking about that might help you, I guess, feel that your concerns are being addressed and looked into. For example, let me share my screen again. And this is part of a presentation that I've given in the past about the 3D visualization. So hopefully you can see the screen now. What you're looking at is the 3D visualization of what we call the potentiometric surface. And I'm kind of explaining for everyone. I know, Tom, you know all of this stuff. But so the potentiometric surface is the shallowmost groundwater surface in the ground. And the white lines that you see here are contour lines. So, you know, whenever there's a monitoring well in these areas, the WSDs go out and sample and they can figure out how deep the groundwater is at each point. And then you draw these contour lines. So the white lines are the contour lines at 5,720 feet above mean sea level, which is right here. And then these blue lines are lines that we've added that are perpendicular to the white lines. And all this shows you is a general idea that if you started like a marble on the surface of the groundwater and let it roll to where it would naturally go, this is kind of the direction it would go. And so if you started a marble here, it would go here. And you can see how the marbles will end up at these capture areas here. And there are wells outside here, extraction systems here too. So this doesn't necessarily mean that contamination is going along these blue lines. It is just a visualization of where, you know, if you started a marble right here, where would it go? And I think, you know, what's interesting is right here, and I'm going to zoom in on the MW38 sand channel. This is actually an independent data set. So this has nothing to do with the geology, but we're seeing the flow converge into this sand channel where there's an extraction system here and there's an extraction system here. And so you can see the effect of those extraction systems and the geology on the potential groundwater flow. We also looked at things like geology. So this is another representation, and I know you guys have seen this before. Tom, you've definitely seen this. This is a visualization of the geology. So what these yellow blobs are is the most permeable geology in the area. So we turned off all of the other stuff that is less permeable. And by that I mean permeability would be like it's more likely to flow in those areas. So it's like a sand or a gravel versus like a clay. So these are kind of the more permeable zones, and you can see that we have data up in here, but we're not seeing a continuous channel that might direct flow from this MW38 sand channel up anywhere else. So that's the second kind of line of evidence on why we're not thinking that this contamination in this area is further to the north or to the west. We do think that it is following these flow path lines instead. And then the third line of evidence. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Can you go back? I just, this is probably here nor there for most of you, but the hydrogeologist in me needs to caveat these images. This is even at this level and even showing, you know, what they demonstrate, they overstate potential. So this is just based on water levels and doesn't take into account that the different geology, finer grain materials can inhibit flow, prevent flow. So just because these lines connect here, that's a conservative approach because a lot of these probably don't actually connect. So the water probably doesn't actually, the marble wouldn't make it all the way to the end. So the question is, where would it stop? And so that's sort of the caveat for this one. And then the caveat for the next one is because of the sand bubbles. Because of the fact that this is a computer and not a hydrogeologist, and the computer doesn't take into account how sediment is actually deposited, what geologic processes do that. It expands the sand, the spots where sand is detected outward and makes it into bubbles, which overstates the amount of sand in that area. So doesn't change anything Diane just said, but I just feel like I have to throw those caveats in whenever these.
True, yes. And then I think it kind of gets to the third thing we look at, which we always say, those other things will tell you where it might be going, where the contamination might be going. It might tell you how it would get there, but the plume tells you where the plume is. So these colored blobs are based on 1,4-dioxane concentrations that have been measured in all of these wells. So the blue dots here are monitoring wells that have been sampled. And then the red obviously means higher levels of 1,4-dioxane. and then down to the green. So this is what the groundwater plume looks like based on our computer visualization of it. And you can see that the computer has it bound here. So, you know, these are 3 separate data sets that we are kind of showing you that all 3 of them do give us the data that shows that there's no indication that this contamination is going farther north than this 1,4-dioxane, or I'm sorry, than this extraction well. So you know, kind of going back to the original question, there was discussion about the DADS landfills wells and placing additional monitoring wells or advancing borings underneath this area to get additional data. And I think the conclusion that we draw from this is that the data that we have seem to agree that there doesn't seem to be further migration from the MW38 sand channel to the north or to the west. So we're not seeing any data to the contrary that there is that migration that you might be worried about, Tom. I believe we went through all of the questions. I don't know if there were any other questions related to those. Maybe there were some from the previous before 12.3. If there's time, we could go back and discuss, or we move on. So I'll leave that to you, Lisa.
Can I just interject here for a second? Colleen did want to point out with this previous conversation that the target zone of hydraulic containment is provided on figures at the end of the CSE plan.
Thank you. Okay. You were just pointing out also beside the MW38, you were also pointing and showing at the north boundary barrier wall that there's contamination beyond the barrier wall that's red and orange. And what does that tell you about the north boundary barrier wall as whether or not it's working?
A couple of things. One, the north boundary barrier wall was not a physical feature in this visualization. So when the computer extrapolates between a well here and a well here, there's nothing that tells it that there's that barrier wall there. So some of that coloration is an artifact that the computer algorithms doesn't recognize that there's a split there. Also, I would say just from a general standpoint, as an engineer who's worked on systems like that, there is some backflow on the other side too that is included in the capture zone. You know, I'll let Tim talk about whether that's a factor at this particular site, but that is not unusual for extraction systems like this. And I've seen that at many other sites that I've worked on. But it's kind of difficult for me to kind of parse out how much of that coloration is, you know, the computer model not recognizing a barrier when it sees it. So,
well, there are wells that are beyond the north boundary barrier wall that have right adjacent to it that have 1,4-dioxane in levels of 600 micrograms. I had asked a question last week or last time, and Tim asked me to send him information, but then after the further discussion or the further communications that came out, I thought Tim was not working there anymore. So I was never really answered his question. But those wells are the reason that there's red north of the north boundary barrier wall, and the reason that there's orange. And so, you know, it looks to me like you've got an area where you show the contamination, and that it should be very simple to create a target capture zone around it and say it shouldn't go beyond that. And so then do the things within that north boundary barrier wall or north of it so that it doesn't go beyond it.
So Tom, a couple things. First, I just want to let you know that I'm alive and well. I'm here. I'm still here. I plan to be here for another year. So hang in there. The well that you mentioned last month was PTB 25, I believe.
Yes.
and that's located immediately north of the barrier wall.
Right.
It was installed basically in the center of the plume, which was more than likely there before the wall was ever even installed. And what happens, and Diane is absolutely right in saying when you're pumping from up gradient of the wall, you create a cone of depression up gradient to the wall, but you don't really affect it that much on the down gradient side. Okay, so we've got a stagnant zone, and we've reported these stagnant zones in the operations and maintenance status reports for, geez, the last 20 years. And as by definition, it's not going anywhere. The source of that is believed to be from the original plume that was there before the wall was even installed. So that explains why we've got high numbers just north of the wall. You go much further beyond that stagnant zone, and you'll see that the numbers have come way down, especially with the pumping, the additional pumping that's incurred, through the response actions up in the 113 area and then all the way up the North Plume. So you're right. I mean, it does look goofy that there's some high numbers immediately north of the wall, but it's because we have not been able to remove it because it's in a containment, or excuse me, in just a non-movement area. It doesn't mean that the wall isn't working. It's just that it's there. It's not going anywhere. And the overall effectiveness of the wall is going to be better evaluated, with the containment system evaluation that's ongoing. So, as I mentioned last time, stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, I would offer to say, don't be surprised if there's contamination immediately north of the wall, again, because of that stagnation zone. Does that help?
Yeah, I'll have to look up stagnation zone somewhere. If you could give me any information on reading about that, I'd appreciate it, because
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
It's just, I don't understand stagnant zones, so I can't comment on it. It seems kind of strange to me that water moves.
So if you have a gradient, as Diane pointed out, you have typically water movement. Water will move as in the direction perpendicular to the gradient.
Right.
Okay. If you don't have a gradient, what's going to drive the water? What's going to make it move?
It's going downhill with gravity.
No, if there's no gradient, if on a flat surface, if you have a frying pan with, that's perfectly flat, and you put a marble in the middle of it, what do you think is going to happen to it?
It would stay there, but that's not a flat surface.
The stagnant zone north of the wall is a flat surface. That's the issue. It is a flat surface, and those show up in the O&M status reports. If you look at the pot surface maps in the north boundary barrier wall area, you'll see that stagnation zone if you look at the contours.
Okay, thank you.
Dave Wilmoth would like to add something, please.
There we go. Thanks, Janine. And so just kind of follow on, and maybe Diane, you were going to talk about this. You also need to look at this in comparison to the map of VOCs in that extent and what that tells you. Diane, were you going to touch on that?
Oh, did you? This one? The one with PCE and DCA?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So we also...
I'm sorry, Diane. Before we move on, John, do you want to ask this question or you want me to go for it? The question John was wanting to ask is, are you then saying that there's no plume and that 1,4-dioxane has not escaped north of the barrier wall and that none of the test wells have shown any level of 1,4-dioxane? And if the surface is flat, what keeps it from going down?
No,
That's two questions.
I don't think we're saying that at all. I mean, there's definitely 1,4-dioxane north of the wall. What Tim was talking about with the stagnation zone is, so you have the natural gradient of groundwater flow. And in this case, it pretty much goes from south to north. So, and then you have the effect of this extraction well, which is pulling water from both sides of it. I mean, there is some barrier so that it doesn't pull as much from the north side and it focuses on the south side, but it by definition has some effect all the way around it, less so on the north. But so as it's pulling this way, there's a point where these two forces are opposing each other and they pretty much equal each other out. And that's kind of where you get, on one side of the barrier, stuff is flowing back south towards the north boundary barrier wall. And then on the other side of the stagnation zone, it's continuing on to the north with the normal groundwater flow. So there's this kind of no man's land in between that both forces are kind of fighting each other, and it's not moving. And that's kind of what a typical stagnation zone is for a system like this.
Can I take a second to bridge what I think that question was really sort of imagining and what we're talking about now? So this discussion and the concept of that stagnant zone and the water table surface, whether or not that has a gradient to it, that's regarding the question, is the 1,4-dioxane plume north of the site continuing to grow because of an ongoing migration from the site? Or can that be attributed to, can we conclude that that is not occurring, and is that attributed to the injection of 1,4-dioxane that occurred for years through the trenches north of the site?
Yeah,
So
and
it's not saying the plume, anything about the plume. And another line of evidence that we'll look at this is the continued monitoring of the concentrations in that plume and looking at that plume shape and how it changes through time. But it's looking at ensuring, with all of these tools and all of this data that are available, that an ongoing source is not present as another line of evidence.
I need to make a comment, please. Although I appreciate all this information, as a member of the community that's closest to this area, I'm not getting any sort of comfort level like I mentioned at the last meeting. This presentation, although incredibly interesting, I appreciate hearing this, there are almost no definitive statements being made. Everything is, it seems like, it appears to be, we believe, and the computer doesn't recognize, and then caveats from Sarah. And now we're hearing about this stagnant zone, which maybe was out there all along, but I think this is indicative of my concerns about EPA and CDPHE getting on the same page behind closed doors and then coming to present something. This sounds like, to me, well, let's see, we've got an issue we've got to address here, so let's start talking about the stagnant zone. They won't know the difference, and we just got on the same page behind the scenes, and I have no idea why all of a sudden now we're talking about the stagnant zone when we've never really, to my recollection, talked about it before. So that's my standard comment about going behind closed doors to get on the same page. Thank you.
We have a question from the chat. When the flow creates a stagnation zone, is that what was trying to be accomplished by using 100 million gallons of our aquifers? Mary or Rudy, do you want to explain that? What 100 million gallons of our aquifers are you referring to there? Unmute. Go ahead and unmute.
There we go.
There
Yes.
you are.
I somewhere in the last couple of meetings and in a lot of the paperwork that I've been reading, I heard that in an effort to contain the contamination, and you have to bear with me that I don't know all of the terminology at this point, but that there was $100 million gallons of water that was brought in my mind, to create a wall, to create that stoppage of the leakage. The pressure from that water was supposed to be containing all this that we're worried about. And so when I listened to Diane's explanation of the water, when you're testing, it flows in from all different directions, and when they merge and hit, that creates a stagnation zone. And so my brain went to, is that what was trying to be accomplished by using all of that water from the aquifers that I live in and would love to have water? So is that what was trying to be accomplished by that process?
Tim, do you want me to take that one, or?
I'm wondering if Tim might want to speak to it, because that was complicated. The injection of water north of the site predated all of the EPA folks on the site now. There was a water rights component, like a water rights requirement that maybe Tim can speak to, and then a hydrogeologic impact of that. So,
right. So the water that was the potable water that was injected, or let me go all the way back to 1984, when the original wall was installed. The water was pumped from the south side, basically the upgradient side. It was treated, and it was re-injected on the north side. Okay. In doing so, in re-injecting it on the north side, it created a mound on the north side. Make sense? So you get this depression that's on the south side of the wall, and then on the north side you get a mound that's created because we're re-injecting water. So the mound that created then helped to minimize, it helped to capture or capture contamination that was, approaching the wall and maybe might have migrated under the wall, and it came back to the wall, or came back to the extraction wells on the south side of the wall. Okay. So unfortunately, the water that was injected on the north side contained 1,4-dioxane. So from 1984 to 2001, plus or minus, the water treatment plant that was used wasn't designed to remove 1,4-dioxane. So we had this artificial mound, if you will, that contained 1,4-dioxane, and then that 1,4-dioxane went in two directions. It went back toward the sump on the south side, and it went north to the north end. Okay, so that's where we believe the primary source of the 1,4-dioxane in the north end plume came from. Okay, so to your question, what about the 150 million gallons of additional potable water that was injected? Well, when we changed over from just re-injecting groundwater that we extracted, and we took that water and sent it down to the sanitary sewer, we had to make up for the consumptive use, or basically the evaporative loss of that water, through a water rights augmentation plan. Okay, so we had to come up with water from somewhere to be able to continue to inject on the north side, and that water was purchased from the East Cherry Creek Valley Water and Sanitation District. Now, I believe most of their water is, their water is from a combination of surface water and groundwater, but it's a public water supply. So the water that was injected from about 2001 to October of 2018 was potable water, correct, that came from East Cherry Creek Valley Water and Sanitation District. But then when we went back, when we stopped that potable water injection, we designed, or we renegotiated the water augmentation requirements such that we could exchange water rights further downstream as opposed to right there at the wall. Okay, so then we didn't have to re-inject potable water there anymore. Does that answer your question?
Yes, but I'm in the learning mode.
Sure.
I guess the question that I move forward to then is that, I mean, has that process stopped at this point, or are you still using water as part of the containment program?
So as of October 2nd, 2018, potable water injection stopped.
And why was it that it stopped?
Because we were instructed by the agency to no longer use potable water injection.
Why?
And that,
go ahead.
Yeah, I can. Sorry. The primary reason was because we felt that injection of drinking water quality volume into the aquifer obscured our ability to monitor the north because it water quality, obviously down gradient of it. So in order to be able to evaluate what that 1,4-dioxane plume is doing, we wanted to discontinue that input.
Could I add one more issue here for Mary's education? But the injection of potable water from our aquifers was never approved as part of the ROD. This was a decision that was made outside of the record of decision, and we have been asking for years for them to stop using our potable water to inject into the site. We were very happy when EPA said it needs to stop. It's not a formal part of the record of decision.
Okay.
I'm not even going to address that. That is not correct. But it's
Whatever. That's fine with me, Tim.
We're chasing down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll go with you.
There's other clarification, I think, is that you are only required to put in a certain percentage of what you extracted. And that was, I can't remember, 3, 5, 10%. And the 100 million gallons or the whatever was that total amount of potable water that was injected far exceeded that percentage that you were required to put back in to replace after withdrawing water. So the explanation we were given was that that's creating a wall to keep water from, or keep any contaminants from going downstream. Further, one of the things that that hasn't really been addressed, all of the water that was injected over that period of time, plus the regular water flow, was going at a rate of 1,000 feet per year downstream. And at that rate, there should be no 1,4-dioxane beyond where you were injecting the water, because it all would have gone way past Mississippi Avenue by this time and already be in Sand Creek. So have you done calculations to see why the heck there's still 1,4-dioxane there if it was only the stuff that was put into the ground before you realized that 1,4-dioxane was a contaminant of concern?
We're in the process of evaluating that, but Tom, first of all, the 1,000 feet per whatever your estimate of flow rate is, no one really knows for sure what the rate is. But even if that was the rate of water migration, that doesn't mean it's the rate of 1,4-dioxane migration.
1,4-dioxane is highly conservative and goes at the head of the water.
1,4-dioxane is very sticky. It will retain on soil for a long, long time.
I would like to ask Dietrich to see if that is really an honest or in a true statement. It is not sticky.
And I think it'd be good to pause here because this is actually a really technically complicated answer. I agree the word sticky isn't quite right because that makes you think of the compounds that sorb to the soil. This works with, is more prone to the pressure that is involved with really tiny pore spaces, capillary pressure. It's the same physical phenomenon that if you prick your finger, you have those little tiny blood sample tubes, and you just set it on it, it shoots the blood up it. So that's a very established chemical characteristic of 1,4-dioxane, that it is prone to tucking up into these tiny pore spaces because of capillary pressure. And then diffusion will release tiny bits of gas over time. There are issues, and this has been discussed for years and is a very reasonable thought, but there are issues with trying to estimate the amount of mass that went into the subsurface and then what has been extracted at extraction wells, and the error bars, because 1,4-dioxane was injected before A, it was analyzed for, and B, when detection limits were so much higher than they are right now. Yes, you can. So getting any sort of accuracy on that estimation just is, for me, it feels like a fool's errand. You can look at what's been extracted. The other thing you can do is sort of put the concentrations into context. And I have it somewhere, but like what a nanogram per liter is, what a microgram per liter is. And then I think that that helps paint a picture. A very small amount of 1,4-dioxane mass, when diluted to the microgram or even milligram per liter level, can occupy a huge area, a huge volume of groundwater. So to me, it illustrates that this is not something to be left to the imagination. It's on that if we try to picture and tease out, okay, well, when I imagine it, it doesn't seem quite right. We can't rely on that intuition because of the concentrations and the unknowns of concentrations in injected water. That's why, that's the primary motivation for putting in all these efforts to look at multiple lines of evidence. And, you know, Margie is—
shut up.
What's that?
Can't hear you. Can't hear you. You're breaking up.
Oh. Well,
That's kind of choppy, Sarah.
I think this has really gone down a rabbit hole. Do we want to table this till December?
I'd like to hear from Dietrich.
I think that Sarah's bringing up a good point, that we don't really have the kind of data that well, at least not that I've seen, and they actually exist, you know, from some of the borings and stuff. But as far as would we expect these particular, you know, soils, sands, and sediments to be something that could hold on to 1,4-dioxane pretty readily? Normally, it is of the site components we look at, the contaminants of interest. Amongst the organic ones, it's probably the most soluble. So we would expect it to move pretty readily with water, and it's considered to be miscible in water. So I think that assuming that it's going to be held up in the soils or something like that, it requires a little bit of speculation. Generally, we would expect it to move with it. There are other things. I would think that a factor to look at that may actually be more important would be, like we talk about these dead zones or stagnation. Those type of areas can slowly bleed 1,4-dioxane into a system like this, and kind of convolute the numbers as well. But that would be my 2 cents on it. As far as mass quantities and stuff, I would generally say we've made some estimates, and I know we've, I mean, years ago, Phil Oberlander made some estimates, and we had those discussions with Linda, looking at the rate that it was being removed. And I do think some mass estimates would help with this discussion a little bit, if for nothing else, to look at what a reasonable expectation would be for extraction and that kind of thing. So on that one, I do kind of disagree with some of the, I think with what Sarah was saying, that might be beneficial, because we all understand the uncertainty that would be involved with that. But even an order of magnitude approximation can be convenient when we're looking at the size of the plume or making decisions on whether or not releases from the site are significant.
So Janine, I'd like to address the first part of Tom's comment about the volume of water that was injected. I think it was Tom, that was you that asked that. The volume of water versus that was needed to maintain a reverse gradient versus what the water rights obligation was.
Right.
So somebody asked that question.
I did.
Okay, and you're right. We actually did inject quite a bit more for a number of years than what the consumptive loss obligation was. And the reason we did that was because we were obligated to maintain a reverse gradient, down gradient to the wall on the north side of the wall. And in order to keep the mound, the water level high enough to be able to reverse that gradient, we had to pump a lot of water into the ground. So that's why there was really more potable water injected than what we were required to replace under the consumptive use requirement.
So Tim,
yes,
if you input that water back into the soil, and your previous statement was that it was taking in the amount of dioxane, that's why you eventually stopped injecting the water back. Then, and now you're saying that you put in more than you were required to, then that was also with the 1,4-dioxane, is that correct?
No, Mary, remember between 1984 and 2001, we had an old water treatment plant that didn't remove 1,4-dioxane. During that time frame is when all of that water was re-injected on the north side of the wall. Then in 2001, that source of water was replaced with potable water.
Okay.
Okay. So
Yeah.
really, between 2001 and 2018, that was clean water that was injected on the north side of the wall.
Okay, and in terms of, and I won't take up much more time with this, but as I've been doing my calling to all the water departments and finding out that our aquifers do not recharge, so that water is whatever is in there and limited at best. Even if we go down 3 more, into the next 2 aquifers on our drilling, I get concerned at how does the public know when developers and city council and all of the powers to be are giving permission to people to draw from these aquifers, and even though our wells are adjudicated here in Thunderbird Estates, adjudication is only good if there's water to be. And it's like no one could give me an answer as to how we could keep our water and for the individuals that are in this community. And I'm learning that as those water levels drop, that causes it to pressure-wise to bring in water from other areas, So I get concerned about this 1,4-dioxane actually being pulled forward into our area because our aquifers are diminishing with everything going on.
Right. And
I can speak to that a little bit.
Go ahead.
Because I own a well as well, and the vulnerability of that well and changes through in land use through time, I can connect very easily to that concern. The first point, I could probably pull up your well permit, but the wells in Thunderbird Estates are much, much deeper. So than the 1,4-dioxane plume. So, and I have an illustration that I painted of this, but the 1,4-dioxane plume is primarily in that unweathered material, which is, it doesn't extend further than about 30 feet, maybe even more shallow than that. And those wells range from, I think the shallow most start their screen at 400, some go down to 1,100. So that's a lot of geology for water to pass through. And as it's doing that, even if, so a molecule of water up here is not going to make it down there. Even if it'd be mixing with so much water along the way, it would be, the 1,4-dioxane would be essentially gone.
Okay.
The 1,4-dioxane in the plume at that northern part of the site is already of very low concentration. Even if that water did make it to the well, which it would not present risk.
Okay, thank you.
And maybe one last comment on that, Sarah and Mary. Your deeper water supply aquifers are, they're called non-tributary water supplies, the non-tributary wells. So they're not in communication with the shallow tributary wells. So you may have, unfortunately, you may draw down your water table, with your deep aquifers, but that's unique to the deep aquifer. It's not impacted by, nor does the water above impact that. Potentiometers are basically the saturated thickness of your water-bearing unit. Your recharge comes from the mountains as opposed to vertically, from above. On a grand, grand picture types of thing. It's recharged from a different source.
All right, thank you.
I have one last comment from Dietrich. I just want to read in for the recording. From ATSDR tox profile for 1,4-dioxane : according to a classification scheme, an estimated KOC value of 17 suggests that 1,4-dioxane is expected to have a very high mobility in soil. Reference Swan et al. 1983.
And this is Bonnie, and I'd like to make one last comment here. I appreciate everybody trying to estimate what's happening to our well water, but I don't think you understand the difference between Gun Club Estates and Thunderbird Estates, and I don't think that you can truly tell us how our water is impacted out here, because yes, we have wells that are fairly deep, but we have one family in Thunderbird Estates that was directly impacted by the sewage sludge fields over on Quincy. And there's sections 4 and 9 over there, and their water was impacted by water traveling from there over into Thunderbird Estates, with its miles away. So the water tables out here are very different and very undependable. And so this is one of the concerns that we have, is that we would like less explanation, which says we believe and we think and stuff like that, telling us about our water. We would like more work done to help us understand how we can prevent things that are at the landfill now from impacting our site. And I personally would appreciate it very much, after all these years, 40 years of working at this site, being told that there's nothing wrong and it can't impact you, and we've done studies and we know better. I would prefer that we don't do that at this point. And Mary, these are people who are experts in many different fields, but we still have to keep our eyes and ears open as to what happens in our neighborhoods in reality. So that's the last thing I'll say on that.
Diane, do you want to move on?
I think I was all done with my portion of it, but I did want to respond real quick to Bonnie's point, because I know I'm guilty of saying, we believe, or the evidence shows me, or qualifying those statements. And that is something that I do because, this is subsurface science. And I want to make sure I'm not telling you something that has a certainty associated with it that is not there. This is good science. It is established science, but it is kind of like being dropped into a forest with a flashlight at night and looking around, and you get a good view and you have, a lot of background information to call upon. But I know what's in this borehole, but I don't know what's 5 feet away. We are using good science to make assumptions, to use good science to tell you what's between these 2 points. but there could be a Volkswagen right in the middle of those points, and I wouldn't know. So a lot of that qualification statement is, the data that we have, the data sets we have. I'm giving you what I'm trying to tell you is the best information, the best science behind it, and my best opinion. So, a lot of the times those qualifying statements are my way of saying, that this isn't a perfect world, and this is the information that we have. And it doesn't mean that it's inadequate. I'm not saying that the data we have is inadequate. I'm saying that even with, if we did 10-foot centers, a well every 10 feet, we still wouldn't know what's in the center of those. And so there is some extrapolation going on. So, when I use that language, I'm trying to tell you to the best of my ability what I'm seeing from my point of view. So I hope that kind of clarifies that. I'm not trying to, be wishy-washy on things, but there is some uncertainty that's inherent in this process.
Diane, I thank you for saying that, and I respect you for saying it. And I've always appreciated your work because you do try to be accurate. It's just that we get a little tired after all these years of hearing everything's fine and coming up and finding that it isn't fine. And when people try and convince us that we're okay just because they have an opinion, we want to get past that. So thank you for that statement. And I do respect your work, and I do appreciate you usually are pretty straightforward and you don't tell us this is the way it is just because I say so. And so I really appreciate your efforts. Thank you.
I just wanted to note real quick, Mary, I just wanted to note real quick, Mary, I did find your well information, and it looks like you are screened from 580 feet deep to 727 feet deep. So right along those lines we talked about.
Yes, and it's interesting because I go in and look at all these charts and everything and the wells around me, and all I know is what we're experiencing out here. And then when I do reach out, it's, yeah, we've known you have problems for years. Well, is there anything you're going to do about it? Well, no, there's nothing we can do about it. And it just, and then you couple it with obviously serious concerns that everybody is concerned about. That's why Lowry Superfund is on the list. And I only hope as a resident of this area using well water that the big picture is kept at the forefront, and that we can get past saying, well, there's nothing we can do to help you. And Aurora doesn't want to come in because they don't want to do the infrastructure. And then you got Cherry Creek, and they don't want it either. And as a small community, we can't afford to do that. And then you couple it with everything else going on, and it just feels like we're running against a wall all the time. So, we put in our storage tanks probably 5-6 years ago, and to have them bleed dry and we had to bring in 5,000 gallons of water was a real showstopper for me. And then to hear that drawdown can impact all the other things that are going on, I think we are concerned as a community. And, we use these forums, and the CAG in the past has used these forums to try and reach a resolution that works for everybody, because I don't think anyone wants our communities contaminated, but the potential is there. So I'm just kind of trying to hold off. And
Mary,
yes.
I would just like to say to Sarah, please, we all have our well information. We're all very well of where our wells are, how deep they are. We have our wells tested. We've got our well logs. We're very aware of where our wells are and how deep they are.
It seems that Sonia would like to clarify, Bonnie, that whether your point is that we want data from actual residential well sampling versus extrapolated measures from other sites and best guesses.
Absolutely, Janine. That's absolutely the point. Thank you for clarifying that very much.
And Paula Smolin is asking, given the illustrations we saw this evening that I assume is using updated technology, how often will these tests and models be repeated so changes will be detected? Tim, you want to take that one?
I'm sorry, I was distracted. Could you repeat the question?
Diane?
I think that's a programmatic question that maybe Linda should respond to. The question was regarding how often the 3dVA, for example, would be repeated, and some other modeling, maybe like.
Well, I think part of it's sampling those north end wells, and so that's fairly simple. Those we have a regular sampling schedule that I might be able to explain too. So how often and into the future are data going to be collected, and then the interpretation of that data.
Exactly.
So off the top of my head, I can't remember the full schedule for the north end monitoring wells, but it's, Tim, can you summarize that?
Yeah, I apologize. I didn't hear the original question. Could someone restate that?
Oh,
Yeah.
I'll ask it again. Given the fact that these models that we saw on the shared screen seem to be much more sophisticated than models that we've seen in the past, and I assume it's the use of new technology that makes it possible for us to have this visual, the colors and the depths and so forth. When do we repeat that? When do you, the powers that be, repeat that so that trends could be detected? How long do we have to wait for another illustration in order to know what the trends are?
So I don't have an answer for you. I mean, to be honest with you, I don't know what the answer to that, but what I can tell you is that every quarter we sample the wells and we update the trend maps so that if there are changes, that occur from quarter to quarter, from, half a year to half a year, from year to year, we'll know it and we'll report that. And then if we have to do a more detailed assessment of the model, I'll go out on a limb and say, we'll look at that. We'll look at doing that. But to your point, how often are the data collected? Say for the north end plume, those are collected quarterly in section 31 and semi-annually in section 30, 19, and 24. So north of Yale. So we'll have 2 sets of data every year to look at those water quality data. On site, it's quarterly, I could say, and then we'll be looking at also the water levels, the gradients, to see if there's any changes in the direction of groundwater movement. Same thing as water quality, right? Sarah, were you going to say something?
No, you did it exactly what I was envisioning, just breaking out that question in evaluating the trends through time doesn't necessarily rely on being able to use the same tools to visualize them, like the 3D visualization. So it's not like we have to wait until we have enough to report that. The quarterly data can be viewed in real time and any concerning changes can be assessed immediately. Not reliant upon that software in order to notice a red flag and take appropriate action. And then, however, those tools are really helpful in getting that picture and the culmination of the data, but we don't, I think at this point, know what sort of frequency that might require. Depends on what the data show.
Well, I hope this is a good stopping point as we have passed 6:30. And since we already discussed the December CAG meeting, I believe that we're good on that agenda, and we'll touch base again when it's closer to the time to make sure what we want to talk about. Any final closing comments anyone must absolutely make?
I do, Lisa. It's Bonnie. I wanted to let you know that I will send you a hard copy of my update tonight so that you have it to share with the rest of the group or to use as EPA needs to.
Okay.
I didn't get it off to you because we've been so busy putting things together, and we just got all of our CAG voting and everything finalized. And so I will send this off to you to either share with the group, which I think would be a good idea, and to use as EPA sees the need.
Sure. I will include it in the some meeting summary that we put in for every month.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And I just wanted to remind folks, I did put the link into the council meeting into the chat, but if you need anything, please let me know. I want to make sure that you don't have technical difficulties when you're trying to listen in. So see you Monday.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks to everyone.
Everyone
Great
have a
meeting.
happy Thanksgiving and stay well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Be safe out there.